You know, when you go out to buy plywood or hardwood, there are a number of choices. You have to understand cores, terms like rotary cut, plane sliced, grades, how many quarters the material is. It can be very confusing. We're going to help you understand what all those items are so that when you purchase, you're making a wise choice. We're going to show you how to break down that material so you get the most yield and best appearance for the parts for your project. So let's look at some examples. An attractive woodworking project doesn't happen by accident. Careful selection of the parts is essential. For example, let's look at this valet with the two matching drawer faces. The material was cut from one board so that the grain ran across. It adds real drama. The top of this nightstand was carefully selected so it almost looks like it came from one board. On this jewelry chest, we prepared the material for the fronts from one block of wood. We did all of our joinery and cutting and then separated it into three pieces so the grain and the curl flows across the project. On this jewelry box, we selected material for the front that probably would have been thrown away. We resawed it, glued it back together, and created a gorgeous panel. When building this glass display table, we used one board and mitered it to create a frame, and the grain flows all the way around. On this server, all the material was very carefully selected to have uniform grain structure. The drawers come from one board. We've looked at how important it is to select hardwood for your project, but plywood is also key. In this nightstand, we selected a cabinet grade material and carefully centered the grain within the frame. It adds real drama. In a more utilitarian piece, we selected materials available from the home center with rotary cut plywood. It was less expensive, but also yields a successful project. So let's look at some of the tips and techniques we use at Wood Magazine that you can use in your shop. We prefer to buy our material in the rough, random width and length. That means when I go to the mill, I don't know how wide the stock or how long the stock's going to be, but I do know how thick it is going to be if I have a couple understandings of what material is available. This is 4/4 stock. It's 4/4 of an inch thick, but there are a lot more choices than that. Here's some samples of 8/4, 6/4, 5/4, and 4/4 material. As you can see, 8/4 is 2 inches thick, 8/4 of an inch. But here are my different options. What I yield from this material is, for example, here's a piece of 4/4 that I've run through the joiner and planer, and now it's 7/8 of an inch thick. If I went to the home center, it's going to be 3/4 of an inch thick. So here I've lost a full 1/4 inch of material that I can't take advantage of anymore. But with material that's this nice, I can make a 7/8 inch tabletop. Just that little extra thickness takes advantage of the options as a custom woodworker that we get to do. But what do I yield from the different thicknesses? Well, in 8/4 stock, and I get a 1 7/8 inch, let's say, table leg, versus an 1.5 inch material that I might be able to purchase at the home center. You know, this gives me a lot more design options. You know, when I go to put a taper on that leg, by the time I leave a small section down here for the foot, I don't have a lot that I can taper, and it doesn't give me a lot of choices. This material, being a lot thicker, if I put the same size base, I've got a lot more material that I can create more drama in how the leg is shaped. Here's an example of what other options I might have. I can have the mill prepare some of the stock in advance. Let's say I need drawer material. I typically make my drawers 1/2 inch thick. That means I can have them plane it to 5/8 of an inch. Let them get rid of all the planer shavings and do a lot of the hard work for me. But with it being 5/8, I can still take advantage of the joiner and planer and get this material flat and true so my joinery is precise. This material would be considered S3S. It's surfaced on 2 sides and jointed on 1 edge. So 3 sides are finished, 1 side's rough. You can even see the mill marks here. all of this material comes in a couple different options. I might get it skip planed, I might get it rough sawn, or S3S. Sometimes you'll hear this referred to as S4S when you pick up from the home center. Whenever you purchase material, you need to also plan that you're going to lose a little bit off each end. For example, with this piece of 8/4 that I bought, I had to cut about 1.5 inches off the end because of cross-checking. This is a result of the drying process. But you may find checking and cupping and cracks in the ends of the S4S material you bought at the home center. So you're going to lose material either way, but just be aware of it. You can't always guarantee that out of an 8-foot board you're going to yield 8 foot of material. Plywood comes in a couple different configurations. There's veneer core, the very traditional way of buying plywood, or MDF core, medium density fiberboard. There's some advantages and disadvantages with both materials. When I'm purchasing material, I'm buying it based on the grade of the faces. So in this example, A1 has an A side. It could be an A, B, C, or D on one side. The second side are numbered, 1, 2, 3, 4. So an A1, meaning it has a really good face, A side, and the 1 is pretty good. This would probably be the inside of the cabinet. This would be the outside. You can also get material all the way down to, say, an A4, where it might be oak on one side, it may be Luan on the other. So kind of watch your materials when you're purchasing them. Other options that are available are, there is also a material called architectural sequential match and numbered. What that means is when you buy 5 sheets, those are all numbered so that the veneer on all 5 sheets looks almost identical. It's sequentially cut from the tree. So if you were putting paneling up, they're going to all match. When I'm purchasing the core, there's a couple options. I can buy veneer core made up of different layers of material in uneven numbers so that the material is balanced. Or MDF core, composite fiberboard with a veneer on both sides. There's some advantages and disadvantages. Structurally, this is much stronger, but the MDF lays a lot flatter. If there's a void in this top layer of veneer or the material right underneath the top veneer, that may telegraph through the surface. With the fiberboard material, the top is going to be perfectly flat. It's also going to be very heavy, almost 25 or 30 pounds heavier than the veneer core. I like to buy combination core plywood. You pay a little bit more for it, but you get the advantages of veneer core in the fact of its screw holding ability, but the advantage of MDF core in the fact that they use a layer of MDF just under the top veneer, and that way the material is super flat. It's my choice when I'm purchasing material. There's one other type of veneered material that I buy. It's called Baltic birch plywood is the old name. You might hear it referred to as Finnish ply or apple ply, but basically it's a larger number of veneers stacked together, and there's almost no voids in it. This also comes with different faces, A, and what they're referred to as AA, BB. There's all different types of options when you're buying Baltic birch, but one of the key advantages, when I'm making something for the shop, I can just sand the edges real smooth and it looks nice. I don't have to put edging on everything. For this jewelry box, I had to purchase my material from a couple different sources. It has plywood on the back. I picked that up at the home center. The cherry for it, I just got at my local mill. It's a domestic hardwood and most places are going to have it. But for the bird's eye maple that's on the top, I had to buy that online. I just did an online search for bird's eye maple and found a place that sold it online. Easy enough. That's doesn't quite cover everything. We've got all our different combination core and different thicknesses of material. I typically buy plywood from a cabinet supplier or a lumber wholesaler. That's where the cabinet shops are buying their material. They have the A1 plywoods. You're going to pay probably more than double for an architectural grade plywood than buying oak plywood at the home center, but you're getting a lot nicer looking material. Where it's less expensive at the home center to buy plywood and you're paying more, at the home center I'm paying $6 per board foot for this oak versus $2.50 a board foot. So there's pluses and minuses when you're buying materials from a variety of sources. One other thing to consider is what grades of hardwood and plywood are available. I can buy select number 1, number 2, different grades of hardwood, but it really doesn't matter. What's going to matter is that's what the supplier has. I can't go in and demand one grade when they have another because they're not going to be able to help me. So being flexible in what you buy is part of the process of working on your projects. You know, I make up a material list before I go to the home center or to the lumber mill of what all my materials are, and then I make a phone call. I find out what they might or might not have and how much the material is, and off I go. But I also take this with me so that I can write on the boards what I'm going to use it for. You know, for example, a blanket chest here, I may decide when I get there that the mahogany looks really nice and build the project out of mahogany when I get there. It might be a little more expensive, but it might be something that's going to make the project look better. So be flexible. So I'm going to make a couple phone calls, find out what I can find from my supplier, and get some oak for a blanket chest. I went to my lumber supplier and I picked up 50 board feet of red oak for a project. How did I figure that, and what's a board foot? Well, a board foot is 1 square foot of material, 1 foot wide, 1 foot long. It may be 6 inches wide and 2 foot long, but it's 1 board foot of material 1 inch thick. If I'm buying material that's 6/4, it's going to be, for example, a 12-inch wide board, 12 inches long. Since it's 1.5 inches thick, it's 1.5 board foot. So I pay a premium for that thicker material. So 8/4 stock may end up costing, not only am I paying double for the surface area, but I'm also going to be paying a higher premium for that material. Now, I bought 50 board foot. I typically calculate that I need about 25% waste. Now, with materials like walnut, when it has a lot of knots, I'll raise that percentage, maybe even up to 40%. So sometimes the more expensive material may not just be in the cost of the material itself, but the waste factor. So based on what I calculated, I bought 50 board foot. That leaves me a little extra. Heck, I can use it for some other projects. I've set my boards up so I can start selecting them based on the grain direction and color. Also, I've got my metal detector, and so while they're here, I can scan each board to make sure there's not a stray bullet or maybe a piece of barbed wire fence that was in the board. It'd be very dangerous to send the material through the planer with a piece of barbed wire fence in there. All my material is kiln dried. It's running at about 5 to 8% moisture content. And really, you may want to invest in a moisture meter, but really only if you're buying air-dried stock. For example, this piece of walnut, it's running about 14% moisture. That's air-dried. It was never put through a kiln to get all the moisture out. I'll want to let this sit in my shop and acclimate for maybe a month before I use it. If it's too moist, it's going to shrink too much and I won't be able to control what happens in my project. A board going from, say, 15% to 8% moisture content when it's finally going to settle into, say, your living room, a 24-inch wide board may shrink as much as 7/8 of an inch. So you'll have to be careful about the stock. So then you may want to invest in a moisture meter. So I'm going to sort out my boards and figure out what I'm going to use for the front and the sides of my blanket chest. They're going to be the biggest pieces. So I always select like drawer faces or the panels in a raised panel door. I'll select that material first because those are the big real estate areas. So I want to make sure I take advantage of the wide stock before then I'll figure out all the small parts afterwards. I hope you have a better understanding of the material choices that are out there so you're making wise purchasing decisions. And also that you're using and preparing your stock flat, square and true, and picking the best material for the best application for your project. Using wide panels, book matching, running grain across multiple parts, it's all a part of creating a successful project. Now take these tips and techniques and apply them to the projects in your shop. Come visit us at woodmagazine.com for more tips, techniques, and projects, and be safe in your shop.